Okay, part two of my rambly video about games that you might want to try if you are looking to do something other than Dungeons and Dragons. I'm very on topic with people. So if you've seen my part one, you know what this is about. If you haven't seen my part one, it's not going to really hurt what I'm saying, but it might have a little better explanation of just what I'm doing. I will ask you to check out the links below. It has links to my author page. It has links to my Patreon page and the Buy Me a Coffee thing, whatever. If you're interested, if you like the video, please check those out. Check out some of my earlier videos. Also, my blog should have a link down there where I have done reviews of some of these games. But what I'm going to be talking about next, we're still in the fantasy genre. And I think I reach... these are mostly pretty acceptable as fantasy. We're still in the fantasy genre. I'm not going too far from that yet. But these are games that are not Dungeons and Dragons. They are not Dungeons and Dragons clones. I will not be talking about Pathfinder or Old School Essentials or anything like that. These are games that I own physical copies of. That's really the only... That I guess is pretty much the criteria. Now this next batch I have... in most cases, I think maybe all cases, I have at least read. Yes, all cases except for one. I have read. I have played none of these, nor run. I don't have actual table experience with them. But either I was moved enough by reading them to be very excited about them, or, because I think in all of these cases I've also had this experience, where I know people, or there are people whose opinions matter to me who have sung the praises of these games. So this is not just talking out of my butt about some rando game that I picked off my shelf. These, I don't have gaming experience with them, but I feel confident in mentioning them as games that if you want to try something that is not Dungeons and Dragons, but still within the realm of fantasy, then check out some of these. So my first up, this is one that I really like. And it's a little annoying to me that I have not managed to get it to the table yet. This is Barbarians of Lemuria, Sword and Sorcery RPG. Fairly rules light. Actually, quite rules light. I really like the system for this. The setting is fine. I think it's based on Lynn Carter's Thongor stories, which were basically knockoff Conan's, but set in Lemuria. Whatever. On the setting, it's a little generic sword and sorcery. It's not, it's not your medieval Europe, but it's Conan with it's like the Conan comic. If you read like Marvel comics, it's like that, where it feels, it's not very good as far as being Conan, but it's a fun sword and sorcery thing. Anyway, but I think that this would be a great system to port over to a Conan game. And that's always been my plan, is if I ran a game set in Conan's Hyborian Age, that I would use Barbarians of Lemuria. I think it's great. I love it has a mechanic on your past careers, which fits so well with those sword and sorcerer heroes, including Conan. Conan starts out as a thief. He's like later on that he becomes a soldier, he does all kinds of stuff, but he starts out as a pirate for a while, but he's a thief when he starts. Yeah, big, he's not as, a real good depiction of Conan would not have him be played by Arnold, as much as I love the 82 film. Arnold was a terrible choice to play Conan. I'll still die on the hill that Casino Royale era, blanking on his name, Daniel Craig, in a black wig would have been the actual perfect Conan, because he is fit without being ridiculous. He has that great crag of a face. Like, that is the face of a brute. And I think he just would have been perfect. And he's not, like, ridiculously hulking, because Conan's shouldn't be ridiculously hulking. Anyway, I've gotten way off topic. Barbarians of Lemuria, I think, would be a great system for running Conan. It is still one of my dream games to get to the table to do that very thing. We'll see if I can make that happen at some point in the future. something I've actually just read for the second time and kind of did a solo playthrough. So maybe I have had some experience because I've kind of done solo playthroughs a couple of times with this. Is the Labyrinth the Adventure game. This is kind of I don't want to say it. It's a little in between. It's very much on the RPG side of things, and I think has a lot of traditional tabletop RPG elements to it, but it's also a little bit more kind of to the board gamey side, and I think would appeal somewhat to board gamers, especially board gamers who are interested in trying tabletop RPGs. I feel like this could be a good bridge because there's a lot of puzzle solving. Reading through it, one of the things I was sort of struck by, especially on this second read through that I just did, there isn't really, I mean, there's one of the puzzles in here that has combat, but there really isn't combat in this. You don't have hit points. You aren't going to get injured. You don't die. You can lose, though. And that's the other thing that's sort of different from a lot of RPGs. There is a winning and a losing. You know, if you get to the end, confront the Goblin King, succeed with the Goblin King, then you win. If you run out the clock and you don't do that, you lose. There. It's a pass-fail, you know? So I find it kind of interesting, this real kind of conjunction of board game mentality and RPG mentality sort of mixed together. The system is super simple. A lot of the puzzles the ones that I've gone through and checked, I think are really neat. I'm pretty impressed with what I've seen with this so far, and I really do want to bring this to the table, especially with some of my more board gamey friends. I think that they would enjoy it. One thing that I was kind of looking at, the first time I looked at this, I thought, oh, you could probably do this in a session. But the more I look at it, and I've read a few people talking about this online, I think this is actually, I would bet you would have to do 3 or 4 standard, like 2 to 3 hour sessions. I bet you'd have to do 3 or 4 to get from the start to the end of the labyrinth. And I have seen a couple suggestions about tweaking the end. And I don't know because I haven't run this yet, but apparently there is a certain aspect where at the end, as written, it seems very easy for the Goblin King to simply always be ahead of your players so they can't catch up. So you might have to do a little something about that. I'm not sure, haven't done that myself. But it's something worth looking at if you do decide to pick it up and run it. Anyway, Labyrinth, the adventure game. I think this is a really cool game, and I'm very jazzed about the idea of getting this to my table at some point coming up. One that I have kind of mixed feelings about, Cairn. This is probably the most OSR thing that I will mention in this game, and this is not a D&D clone, but it is, I guess, I don't understand, honestly, you know, it's like pornography, it's a, I'll know it when I see it kind of thing, I guess, with the OSR, and I don't know where one thing starts and the other ends, but apparently Cairn is part of the OSR, I guess. It seems like a pretty stripped down system. It has very, I think, distinct, in spite of being sort of short, it has a very distinct voice. It talks about these principles for wardens, which is their GM, DM, whatever, principles for players. I think these are very, I think this is a nice thing to have in here. It really gets things, I think, fairly quick. People use this for solo RPGs. I think it has a good setup for solo RPGs. It's got a good thing for making very randomized characters. I actually have a character that I did for it that I liked. I like the character sheet. It's very visually appealing. There's not really, if I remember right, there's like no art, or very little art. All of that is pretty cool. And the bestiary has no art. I was a little bummed actually with that. It's literally just, it's super cheap, so it's not like I'm going to complain too loudly, but it is like a book about this size of just stat blocks. This is what the creature is here, stat block, and very not evocative. Anyway, Cairn, I think, might actually be, and this is a very weird thing for me to say, and anybody who's really chatted with me about games will know how weird this is for me to say. I think Cairn might be slightly stripped down too far. When I was reading through this, I feel like there might be a couple of pieces of foundation missing, and they stripped it down so far. There's something not to, there's a missing rung to hold on to, you know. But maybe I'm wrong, and I do want to try this out. It has things that appeal to me. I don't see it being a big campaign game. I feel like this would be, say you wanted to run an old TSR dungeon crawl module. Maybe you'd take out Karen and run it through this. I don't know that I would want to do a whole campaign with this game, but maybe I'm wrong. And if you've played it and you liked it and you did do a campaign, talk about it in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. I don't know. Up next, I don't have experience with this, but I have heard nothing but positive things about Blades in the Dark. I'm very curious to check this out. I love, as I've mentioned in previous videos, I love urban fantasy. I love city-set stories and city-set games. That's what this is. This is a little bit more kind of in that Victorian vibe. It's a gloomy, still a very fantasy city, but it's a gloomy, dark city with lots of ghosts, and I think they're running things on ghost magic, essentially. And you are thieves. You're like, you form your own gang, and you go out and you try to form like a criminal empire or make big scores. You're doing heists, and it has unique systems for running heists, and there's a lot of stuff with apparently like flashbacks and all kinds of things. So, like in a heist movie where you're running through the scene and then you're like, oh, but wait, look back 24 hours and we bribed this guard to let us through this gate, or, whatever. So I think this is a really neat game. Now, I found reading the book, I found it very dry. It was a very dense read through, and I as much as there were things in it I was really enjoying, I actually found it to be a slog to read through this book. So I very much want to actually play it to get a better handle on it. But everyone I know who's played it has pretty much loved it. My brother apparently ran a bunch of games of it. He really enjoyed it. I've heard just very positive things overall about it. I know that the clock thing in this, which apparently doesn't originate in here, but was really heightened in this, is something that I plan to use in my games in the future. So anyway, Blades in the Dark, I think, is worth checking out. Everyone seems to love it. I definitely really want to try it at some point. We'll see. Savage Worlds. Now, I have Savage Worlds Deluxe because it was cheap. People swear by Savage Worlds. I read through it, and I was actually surprised. I kind of knew, or I'd heard, that it had some connection to Deadlands. It is from Pinnacle, who put out Deadlands originally. I didn't realize how close it hewed to Deadlands. There are some variations, but it's very similar to the original Deadlands mechanics. Again, there are differences, but it's in the same spirit as that. And I remember with Deadlands, I found it a steep learning curve to get into it, to really figure out just how everything worked in a session. But then once you did, it worked extremely well. And it was, in spite of having a little more crunch than I normally like, once you got it, once everybody sitting at the table was really on board and you were playing it, it was very fast. It was a very fast and loose system, and I liked it quite a bit. I really enjoyed it. I played Deadlands for like a year and a half, and I had an absolute blast. And part of it was the system. I mean, the setting was tons of fun. The game we were in was fun. But part of it was the system. I really liked the way it worked. So Savage Worlds, I haven't tried it. Heard very positive things about it. People like it for more pulpy cinematic games, and I can see why they would, thinking back on my Deadlands experience. And again, I know that there's differences, but it is in the ballpark. It's certainly easily as close as most of the OSR stuff is to Dungeons & Dragons. It's like, this is to Deadlands. So there is a newer version that is more expensive and apparently has a couple of odd things fixed. I got this again because it was really cheap, and I was just curious because I had no experience with Savage Worlds, I thought, and I wanted to have at least some idea of the game. I also have a couple of books, source books, that used Savage World as their system, and I figured, well, if I ever want to know what that means mechanically, I should have a copy of this. even though I got them to use probably for basic role-playing, but whatever. So, Savage Worlds. This is also not just exclusively fantasy. This is a multi-genre rule system. Up next, Dungeon World. Dungeon World is probably the most famous, well, I don't know if it is so much anymore, but it's one of the most famous Powered by the Apocalypse games. I read through this and was kind of captivated while reading through it. And I, at that time, had a similar reaction to what I ended up later on having with Dungeon Crawl Classics, where I was like, oh, wow, this is like, what if D&D, but fun? It has a rule system that is not at all like Dungeons & Dragons, but it does capture some of the spirit of it. And I think there's a lot to go in, but I also, I worry with, and I don't have experience with it. I haven't played it, so take that into account when I say this. But I worry with Powered by the Apocalypse games, they feel like they're intended to be rules light, but are not rules light. And I want to try it. I want to play it. I want actual experience with it before I can, say one way or another for sure. But that's how it sort of feels when you're reading and you sit there like, really, is that what gameplay is going to be like? Do I have to have a move for everything I do? I don't. That seems a lot, but maybe I'm misreading. Maybe I don't know how gameplay really works. But Dungeon World, I think, is one to check out. It's still within the same genre wheelhouse as D&D, but very different mechanically. And I think that's worth looking into. I'll try this. At some point, I'll try this. The one problem with Dungeon World is I think it's unavailable right now. I think it's still available in PDF, but I feel like the last time I looked, it was harder to find in physical copy. Hopefully I'm wrong, and maybe it's in print somewhere. I don't know. But this is the one, I think of all of these that I've talked about, this is the only one where I'm a little bit not sure about as far as getting a copy of it. I know there are other Powered by the Apocalypse games out there. Thirsty Sword Lesbians just came out relatively recently, and I want to check that one out. Up next, this is kind of a cheat. I have used basic role-playing a lot, and the core mechanic in this is basic role-playing, but this is RuneQuest, role-playing in Glorantha. This is the starter set, which is an amazing starter set. But I have never played in RuneQuest, and RuneQuest has it has some mechanical things that are specific to its setting that I haven't used, and it has an exceptionally detailed setting. This is one of the most detailed and rich settings in the tabletop RPG industry, bar none, going back to the beginning. Glorantha is probably one of the most built up, developed, explored setting out there. And that's scary because it's a lot to take in. And I have kind of been trying over the last couple of years to get myself into it. With this starter set, which I have been bad and I still have not cracked into and read, I've only looked at it. You can see I have a video earlier with an unboxing of it. From what I understand, this does do a good job of kind of giving you a taste, letting you understand how it plays, what it means, what things are important in gameplay. Again, it uses basic role-playing, variation on basic role-playing. So while combat is very real in this life, this hard life that people live, it's super deadly. So if you can think your way out of a situation, that's a much better approach. There's a solo adventure in this, which RPG Imaginings has done on his channel that I think is very good. And like the solo adventure in the Call of Cthulhu starter set, I'll talk about that at some other video, I think it does a great job of piecing the system out to you so you don't get overwhelmed, and piecing the setting out to you so you don't get overwhelmed. So, highly recommend grabbing this if you want to try Bronze Age fantasy. This is not your D&D. Bronze Age fantasy using basic role-playing as a core. Basic role-playing is a great game. Skill-based, not class-based, so your character becomes who you play. The more you do things, the better you get at them. It's not a level-based system. You don't suddenly get magically better at all kinds of things because you hit X number of things that you killed. This is, the skills that you use in game determine who you become. And I think it's a really cool system. And I am fascinated by Glorantha, which is just a wild setting. So finally, a game, again, a little bit of a cheat because I have used other games using this system, but I have not played Forbidden Lands. I have played Alien and Tales from the Loop, which I actually ran. And they both use the system, the Year Zero engine is what it's called. Great system. I love it. It's intuitive, pretty easy to grasp. Each game that uses it has a variation on it. So there's stuff in Alien that is different from stuff in Tales from the Loop, and from what I understand, there's stuff in this that is different from those two. But the core of it is very intuitive, and I think it's a very good system. I think it's a good beginner system too, but also good for later play. Now, this is like a kind of it's taking that system, but going into that old school fantasy, the 70s post-apocalyptic fantasy kind of thing, gritty, grim, tough, life is hard. Yeah, it does that. So, and I don't think I've actually done any kind of video showing this off. There's videos out there that talk about it, but it's gorgeous. Look at these books. These are beautiful, absolutely beautiful books, and they've got this gorgeous, like, grayscale art. It's very cool. The map, and these are just beautiful books. There's another book. There's a map in here that I'm not going to take out. It's just a beautiful, beautiful product. Physically, it's fantastic. And again, Year Zero, I think, is a great system. So I do want to try this out if I need to scratch that fantasy itch. Yeah. So, okay, that's ending my second video. I can see already that I'm getting close to the end of this thing's ability to record. Apparently, I'm going to do at least a third video because I will be talking about some stuff if you want to branch further away from fantasy. So this was the second video of fantasy games that you might want to try if you are ready to move away from Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah. All right. Take care.